They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And wow, it has been a couple of days since we talked. I mean, we talk about it here. You're in Virginia. I'm in California. I'm in Los Angeles County. And it has been pretty wild. Everybody has been talking about these California fires. They are absolutely insane, Katie, like nothing I've ever seen. And it's not just the fires now that we're covering. It is what went into creating what was already going to be a disaster because of the wind and because of the dry conditions, but was only made worse by what I call the liberal lunatics that are running our state of California and, of course, the city and county of Los Angeles.
I know. I've been thinking about you every day. I think everybody in the country is horrified by the images that we've seen. I was texting with my sister just a couple days ago because she lived in Pacific Palisades. And I was asking her, is everybody she knows okay? And she said she was texting with friends who were trapped in gridlock trying to evacuate and couldn't get out. So then you saw those incredible images of the bulldozers having to move out of the way abandoned cars so that the fire trucks could get through.
It was something to be seen. And actually, when that didn't happen, I don't know if you saw this, but this was kind of crazy. Did you ever watch the Police Academy movies?
Yes.
Or Three Men and a Baby. Remember Steve Guttenberg? He was like a big actor during the 80s, but apparently he lives in Pacific Palisades and jumped into action and started helping people get out of that situation because everybody was trapped. So he was moving cars. People would leave their keys behind. He'd move them out of the way for the fire trucks. I mean, it was amazing to see. And that is one of the things about disaster. There are heroes, everyday heroes that are bred from moments like this. And I got to say, I don't know where Steve Guttenberg is politically, but he was one of those heroes for jumping in to help the fire department. I don't know how smart it was, but he definitely helped out. And that was great to see. So I just thought maybe we could start with kind of an overview of the major fires, because I think there's a lot of confusion. If you're not in Los Angeles, you really look and you think, wow, the whole place is on fire. So just to tell you a little bit about the scenario, we have Santa Ana winds that come through California a lot, very often in the fall and the winter months. And those are really strong, gusty winds. And typically they're surrounded by really dry conditions as well. We haven't had a lot of rain at the last part of this year. Now, last year and the year before, we had really wet and rainy years, but that caused an overgrowth of brush. And then the summer comes, things get hot, and then things dry out. And then it becomes very hot and dry. We haven't had any rain really to speak of at all this winter yet. And you've got these wind conditions which kicked up. And I always hate to be dramatic, but I do think that, well, maybe I don't hate to be dramatic, but I do think that these winds were probably at least some of the worst winds that I've experienced living in California, and I've lived here my whole life. They weren't your typical Santa Ana wind where they were blowing in one direction. They were almost blowing in like a circular manner. So it was almost like a cyclone type wind. And you had wind speeds of well above 70, 80, even 100 miles per hour that were whipping across Southern California.
Hey, before you go on, we should get Misty to show that clip of the McDonald's.
So what you see right now, as if you're watching us, is you'll see this is a McDonald's. I believe that's a McDonald's near Altadena, Pasadena with the Eaton fire. And you can see how strong those winds were. So once you get a fire started, the embers, I've learned that embers can fly lit for miles before they actually are snuffed out. So that creates a nightmare-like scenario. So the first fire to break out was in Pacific Palisades, and it started up in the hills. This quickly exploded into a city, which is also highly unusual because typically these fires will continue to burn the fuel on the ground when they're in these hill communities, mountainous communities. But this went straight into Pacific Palisades and has caused nothing but havoc already as we record today. Well over 17,000 acres burned. This is in history the most devastating fire as far as damage goes that LA has ever seen. And that's because the communities have been completely wiped out. I mean, you have shopping centers gone, you have homes, neighborhoods, entire streets that are wiped out. And to put in perspective, and the fire is still burning as we record, so we don't even know the scope of the damage yet, but we're talking about 50 to 75% of the city of Pacific Palisades is just wiped out. It's gone. 2 elementary schools have been destroyed. Their high school has got pretty significant damage. It's going to be very devastating, and it continues to be devastating. Now, I heard before I sat down with you today, Katie, that they had just found some human remains that they were investigating.
Oh.
If that is the case, that would be the first loss of life that would be found in this fire. So fast forward now to Tuesday evening, and I'm watching the news coverage of the Palisades when all of a sudden reports come that near my house in Altadena, Pasadena, the Eaton fire breaks out, again in a mountainous community, but the winds whip down and bring it into the city of Pasadena and Altadena. And for perspective there, that's where much of the country watches the Rose Parade or the Rose Bowl football game just on New Year's Day. Really beautiful city of Pasadena and very close to where I live. So, of course, I was paying attention to that one. This fire has had already 5 people who have been killed by this fire. You've got 10,600 acres that are burned as we record this, and really tragic because there's some really beautiful, charming old homes in this community. And one of the saddest stories that I've heard so far is that there was a man who lived in his home for 60 years who was trying to save his house, and his body was found still clutching the garden hose on the side of the road because he was trying to save his house and didn't get out of the way in time. Then you had the Hearst fire, which broke out in Sylmar, which is in the San Fernando Valley, going up into the Santa Clarita area. For those people who've been to Magic Mountain, that's kind of the gateway into that community. And that fire has about 10% containment and about 900 acres burned. That was just in one night. So we had 3 significant fires burning, which stretched our resources very thin with our fire personnel. And we'll talk about what went wrong. There's a lot. And because of the wind, all of the air support was grounded. So typically you can fight the fires from the air by dropping water, but you can also drop flame retardant, which helps them kind of curtail where the fire goes. It puts it into a containment area if they're able to drop some of that from the air. They were not able to do it because of the windy conditions. So the air support was out, which just left the ground crews to go in and take care of business. And lo and behold, as they're trying to go in, and this particularly in Pacific Palisades, I haven't heard as many reports of this in Pasadena. There are some, however, where the firefighters were out of water. They would hook up to fire hydrants, go into communities where they needed the water to start fighting the fires and put themselves in terrible situations, these firefighters, and they found out that these fire hydrants were dry, no water left. Really bad scenario.
So I was looking into this because I was just so shocked. And, it's really interesting because, of course, you see all over social media and mainstream media, actually, blame for the Democrat policies. And I'm like, people are just looking for somebody to be angry at. But my goodness, it seems like there is a lot of legitimacy to that claim. I looked back at some of what's behind this. I guess if you go back the farthest, you had Proposition 1 passed in 2014, which allocated $7.5 billion to capture rainwater and snowmelt before it went into the Pacific. And I read that not a single new reservoir or water capture system has been completed.
Yeah. It's really funny.
Wow.
So living here, I have always blamed the unions for running the state of California into the ground, but I have to amend my statement. The unions are not great, but the environmentalists, I really believe, are the people who are suffocating us today. And I do mean that. Nobody can breathe. There is ash in the air. It is apocalyptic. You hear that term a lot. There are people who are without power. I mean, we're the 5th largest economy on the planet. We pay a lot to live here, especially in LA County. You can hear it in my voice, especially in LA County. And we can't put water in fire hydrants. We can't capture rainwater. We have a problem keeping the electricity on. My mom's been without power for about 30 hours now and no end in sight to when that's going to be repaired. There are so many issues that California should just be doing better at. And it does come down to these democratic policies, these elected officials who bow at the altar of the environmentalists who would rather save a spine flower than save someone's life. And we have some real problems. So before we get there, let's talk about the water, because this is a huge deal. And firefighters literally who are putting themselves on the line, and let me tell you this, no pre-deployment for the firefighters knowing these winds were coming. It's a problem with the LA Fire Department, but let's stick to water. Take a look at this. These are images of firefighters in LA County using purses to take out the flames. Look.
What in the world? The firemen don't have hoses, so they're like literally using purses, women's handbags, filling up women's handbags to put out fires. Look at this. What in the world? LAFD Fire Department using women's handbags to put out fires. What is going on here? Have you guys ever seen this in your life? Look.
All right. So I want to tell you that the fire department, fire crews have done incredible work. They are exhausted. Everybody's been on overdrive. We've had to bring in reinforcements from not just Northern California, but Oregon, Washington, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, you name it. A lot of neighboring states are having to come in to kind of help us out because we are stretched thin. Literally right now, the scariest thought as we record today, Katie, is that the city and the county of LA said we can't handle another emergency. We don't know if there's a fire bug out there who's lighting all of these fires. There was a fire that started up in Hollywood just last night, which thankfully they were able to get control of. But it's frightening to think that you've got firefighters who are that depleted and that they don't have the resources they need. So they're collecting water in women's purses to put out fires. They can't even go to fire hydrants because they're worried that these fire hydrants are dry. This was Gavin Newsom's explanation, the governor of California, for these fire hydrants that were empty.
What is the situation with the water? Obviously, in Palisades ran out last night in the hydrants. I was talking to the firefighter on this block. They left because there was no water in the hydrant here.
The local folks are trying to figure that out. I mean, just when you have a system that's not dissimilar to what we've seen in other extraordinarily large-scale fires, whether it be pipe, electricity, or whether it just be the complete overwhelm of the system. I mean, those hydrants are typical for 2 or 3 fires, maybe 1 fire. You have something at this scale, but again, that's going to be determined by the local.
When his lips move, he's lying. Let me tell you how furious that makes me. He says that this just happens in other fires. It does not just happen in other fires when the hydrants are not filled, when the reservoirs are not filled. That doesn't just happen. I'll tell you why, because I've lived here, I've seen it. It doesn't just happen. And then typical Gavin Newsom, when he gets called on the carpet for anything, whether it's fires or homelessness, he constantly reverts back to the fact that it's up to the local officials. He is past the buck Chuck is what he is. And it is infuriating. So you brought up the proposition that was passed years ago to collect rainwater. There's such a deep issue here with water. And President Trump, you've probably seen, has been asking Gavin Newsom or requesting he resign because of the water problems in California. So we have a great problem with water because when water falls, which it does, we don't capture it. It runs right into the ocean. So all of the capabilities to capture water that voters voted for and funded have been curtailed and actually pushed aside. Again, because of the environmentalists and their lobbying efforts on the very tip top of our elected officials in California. So we aren't collecting rainwater, even though that's the will of the people. And last time I checked, we did live in democracy, right? This is supposed to be democracy, the will of the people. No, it's the will of the environmentalists who have the money to send the legislators to Hawaii for vacation. There's also another issue going on when it comes very locally to the capture system that we do have, which is the reservoirs that are used by the firefighters, the deltas that were implemented up in Northern California. These bodies of water have fish in them. The Delta smelt, you may have heard about, lives up in Northern California. They are the equivalent of an anchovy. And every single year, they release millions of gallons of fresh water into the ocean because the environmentalists are trying to save the Delta smelt. Meanwhile, people are losing their homes and dying, and they're concerned about the Delta smelt. But you know what? Good news, the smelt are safe today. The city of Pacific Palisades not. So that's another issue. Now on to the fire hydrants. So there's been a lot of talk about what went wrong with the reservoirs that fill up the fire hydrants. And part of the story that the local officials are telling you is right. And that is that there was a run on the hydrants because there were so many people using it, the pressure went down. And there were also a lot of power outages, which caused a lot of energy lapses. Now, you would think lesson number one would be generators, I think, but they're obviously focused on other things in Los Angeles and in California. So I guess that wasn't on the agenda. But with the reservoirs, I've learned there are fish in the reservoirs that need protecting. So they can only fill the reservoirs to certain levels to protect the fish that live in them. So what happens when there's a disaster like this? There's no water in the reservoirs and they go empty, which is why there was nothing to fill the fire hydrants. So that's really your problem with the fire hydrants. When people are talking about this, it's asinine to think that we are prioritizing fish above human people, human life, and their property.
But also, come on, look, let's be clear. It's really a whole host of Democrat policies that have contributed to this. I mean, the whole treatment of water in California is really got to be issue number one here. But what's happened here in Los Angeles, it really is like the perfect storm, all the different ways that different Democrat policies have come together. So the fact that they imposed a cap on what insurance policies, what insurers could charge, meant that just a few months ago, many people's insurance, homeowners insurance, was canceled. Yeah. And what about the fact that because of restrictions on building, builders have had to push more and more into areas that are, not as habitable. And so that's also been a big factor. Look, we've got to talk though about your mayor. I'm sorry, but
yes, we do.
She's just been incredible at this. So I think the one thing, Mayor Karen Bass, the fact that she's getting slammed for this, she cut $17.6 million from the fire department budget. Right? She was in Ghana while this was happening. But
I wish she would have stayed.
I know.
To be honest.
And then, I don't know if you've seen this, but somebody put together a clip about her in her youth. Do you know that she was a member of Castro's Venceremos brigades, this leftist organization? She made over 15 trips to Cuba. And then their goal was to radicalize people here in the U.S. Okay, but that has nothing to do with it, right? Okay. But what I find incredible above all is her response to being questioned. This is just the ultimate in arrogance. So let's play this clip that shows LA Mayor Karen Bass being questioned about what's going on.
Do you owe citizens an apology for being absent while their homes were burning? Do you regret cutting the fire department budget by millions of dollars, Madam Mayor? Have you nothing to say today?
Can you back up? Appreciate it.
Have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today? Elon Musk says that you're utterly incompetent. Are you considering your position?
All right, let's stop it there. But I want you to know that if we continue to play that would go on for another minute and a half of him asking her questions and her not answering. And if you're not watching the video feed of our podcast, she literally is not walking away from him. She's just standing with her eyes looking down at the ground. She's what's really strange.
She's not even nodding or shaking her head or doing anything. She's just sitting there arrogantly.
It's wild.
Silent. It's stunning. It's stunning.
Now,
it's no secret. The world's unpredictable. One moment, everything's fine. And the next, the power's out and the cell towers are down. But with a satellite phone from sat123.com, you don't have to be cut off from the world. No matter where you are or what's happening, Sat123 keeps you connected. Whether you're deep in the mountains, on the road, or dealing with a natural disaster, your satellite phone will work when nothing else does. This is about being prepared. Sat123.com is family-owned, American-built, and focused on keeping you safe. They understand that in today's world, connection is more than convenience. It's essential. So here's the deal. Go to sat123.com and use code Katie for $25 off your first purchase. Don't get caught off guard. Stay connected. Stay prepared with SAT123.
If someone was standing in front of me and I'm the mayor of Los Angeles and they're telling me that someone's calling me incompetent, I'm going to give you the what for. And I'm going to tell you all the reasons why I've been doing my job. And it doesn't matter where in the world I am because I'm always in charge of Los Angeles. And here's what I've done, X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to talk back to them. I'm not going to stand like I've just gone mute. I mean, this was strange. And it's very Biden-esque, where when these liberals get called out for things, they don't know what to say. If they can't shout at you abortion or climate change, it's almost like somebody has stolen their brains. Like they can't come up with anything else. It truly, it's like robotic. I mean, it almost is frightening. It's like a sci-fi movie. So if you haven't had a chance to see that clip, watch it because it's absolutely disturbing. But here's the problem. Well, there's many problems with Karen Bass and the leadership of Los Angeles. Karen Bass has to answer a couple of questions. One, I'm not going to be upset that she went to Ghana. I think she should be in Los Angeles. You're the mayor of LA, but President Biden's team asked her to go for the inauguration of the president there. She goes. Fine. But if you know that there is a wind event, which apparently we knew this was coming for at least 5 to 7 days, why would you leave your city unprepared? Why wouldn't you be coordinating with the LA Fire Department and the fire chief? Why wouldn't you make sure that there was a pre-deployment of firefighters? Why wouldn't you put the National Guard on call or ask Gavin Newsom to do that if you know that there is going to be something significant while you're gone? She makes a choice to leave. And then when she comes back, she flies back into town very secretly. That was the first, the questioning is the first we saw of Karen Bass when she returned to Los Angeles. And that reporter wasn't, just some average Joe. That was somebody from the Sky News who was asking her questions that were fair and relevant. And she didn't have an answer to them. So she's taking heat because the fire department, first of all, she cut the budget of the fire department by about $17.6 million, almost $20 million. And she was going to cut more this year. And the fire chief, Kristen Crowley, came out and said just a couple of months ago that with this budget cut, they were no longer going to be able to do emergency preparations for major disasters. A problem in Los Angeles where we have earthquakes and fires. So she knew that this was a risk and didn't do anything about it. 2 weeks ago, I just learned this today. 2 weeks ago, they stopped testing fire hydrants because of budget cuts to the fire department. What just happened? Now, look, we believe that it's a reservoir issue, but we shouldn't stop fire hydrant testing. That should be at the front lines of all of this. And with this new fire chief, this is another story. She matches up perfectly with Karen Bass's prioritization of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The fire chief in Los Angeles is a lesbian woman. And that was the first time a lesbian or a gay person and a woman became the fire chief in LA. Congratulations. I honestly don't care what she does when she goes home. I don't care who she goes home to. I just want you to be the best and the brightest. Do you know that they have spent $8 million within the fire department to create a DEI board so that they can focus their efforts on diversity and inclusivity? This fire chief has come out and said when she first that she was glad she was making history because her main purpose was not to fight fires. It was not to keep Los Angeles safe. It was to encourage more inclusivity within the department. Now, that is extremely frustrating because your budget shortfall probably could have used that $8 million that you put aside to create a bunch of high-paying jobs to talk about DEI and pat each other on the back. The priorities are so out of whack. Like if you want to look at someone's priorities in life, you look at what they spend money on. And the city of Los Angeles and the LA Fire Department is spending more money on diversity, equity, inclusion than they are on keeping people safe. And that to me is reason enough for both Karen Bass and for Chief Crowley to resign. I absolutely believe that they should. They also have personnel shortages, yet they are still in the process of firing firefighters who would not take the COVID-19 vaccine.
I saw that.
People who have been their battalion chiefs who are very highly skilled in fighting fires and in leadership positions, and they're still firing those individuals today.
I saw the number 113 firefighters have lost their jobs in LA because they refused to take the COVID vaccination.
Yeah, it's just, again, unexplainable, inexcusable. Who are you bringing in? You're getting rid of the best and you're bringing in people that check boxes. And we're now at the mercy of that. It's just quite frightening. The DA also has been involved. He's new. I am cautiously optimistic about Nathan Hochman, but another piece of the story that's been happening, and I think there's a special place in hell for these people, is the looting that's been going on. When you have these communities that have just been ravaged by fire, or you have people who have been evacuated from their homes, not sure if they're going to get to go back again, and you've got looters going through to try to, like buzzards on a dead carcass, trying to take what last little bits they can. The DA has actually come out and said he's going to prosecute these people to the fullest extent of the law. But it was laughable to hear Mayor Bass say the same thing, because Mayor Bass has worked against the city of Los Angeles when it comes to crime. She never talks about prosecuting people. So it's hard to take her seriously when she's trying to speak out against the people who are capitalizing on the looting. It's just, it's really like a whole comedy of errors that have come together in really bad ways that are going to have a lasting impact on people's lives. And you mentioned, and I think it is really worth underscoring, once the fire is out, people are going to have to deal with smoke damage. Once the smoke damage is gone, people are going to be looking around. And I'm telling you, the next thing that you are going to hear people talk about is the insurance problems. Yeah. Gavin Newsom and the state legislature with these premium caps drove insurance companies out of the state of California. And I see a lot of people blaming the insurance companies, but if they can't afford to do business in California, of course they're going to leave. Mm-hmm. And now, literally, by creating this situation, Gavin Newsom has almost given the insurance companies a monopoly, because the ones that are left, can you imagine what our premiums are going to be when all of these fire claims are paid out? You've got people who have lost their homes that were canceled. Their premium policies were canceled just a couple of months ago, and maybe they weren't able to get fire insurance. What is that going to do to the housing market, the real estate market, people's finances? I mean, think about it. Most people's whole economic future is tied up in the real estate, in the property that they own. Yeah. And if that's wiped out, what are you supposed to do? This problem is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens as far as people wanting to rebuild versus people just saying, I give up, I'm out of here, I don't want more of this. But, before we run out of time, I want to just tell you, because there's a story happening here in my home state of Virginia that it doesn't have as devastating consequences, but it is absolutely another story of utter failure and incompetence of Democratic leadership. And that is, we had a big snowstorm on Monday, and that caused a power outage in Richmond. And because of the old and unmodernized water processing system, the system flooded internally and backed up, and sewage got into all the water. Our capital city of Richmond has had no water all week. So the hospitals have all been evacuated. Our son had to come home because he's living there. Our Senate, our House of Delegates and State Senate had to suspend operations. They're supposed to be in session this week. They could not be in session because of this. And it's just incredible to me. We knew this was coming, right? That these failed policies of these Democrat mayors in these cities across America, you're going to have to, the bill is going to come due eventually, right? You're going to see the cost of these failed policies. And I think this is what you're seeing in Los Angeles, in Richmond. And all I can say is I hope it's a wake up call. I really do. I hope it's a wake up call for the failed DEI policies, the misallocation of resources, the corruption, the lack of responsiveness to voters. Again, I still think the most insulting thing of all of this is Mayor Bass's response to that journalist, to be so arrogant and just to not even think that she owes an answer to the people of Los Angeles.
Or even just to say, my heart is breaking for you, Los Angeles. I'm here to help you recover. But it was nothing.
Nothing.
And just a couple of last few points. People laughed at President Trump when he came to California 2018, 2019. I've heard a lot of conservative talk radio play back the clips of President Trump talking about forest management. And I can remember people thought that was so funny that he was talking about forest management. And
they made fun of him for it.
Sure did. It's something that we may not have called forest management, but it's exactly what the sane people in California have been calling for. And that is, number one, controlled burns, which we used to do all the time, which are no longer allowed without the process to do a controlled burn now in California, it's laughable. You have to go through CEQA, which is all environmental regulations and training. It's almost impossible to do controlled burns. They won't let heavy equipment out into the forest because they don't want it to trample like the precious spine flower or the flora that is out there. So you can't bring that out anymore because fire department personnel is stretched so thin. We live in the foothills, obviously, but we would get the knock on the door when I was growing up. Every summer, the fire department would come and give you the recommendations for brush clearing. And if you didn't do it, they'd do it for you and you'd get a bill. That doesn't happen anymore. It has completely changed. And because of that and the overgrowth, it is something we're going to have to deal with. Are the people in charge of the state of California? Are the people in charge of the country? Or is it the special interest environmentalists that are in charge of the country? We have to start making a decision. We have to start looking in the mirror. And the reason I am hopeful because I don't want to give up on my state and I don't ever want to give up on our country. After President Trump was shot and raised his hand up in the air and said, fight, 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 I looked at social media. I think I shared this with you to see which celebrities would be supportive of President Trump and which ones were quiet. I got to tell you, looking at celebrities after the fires in Los Angeles, because celebrities were devastated. I mean, there are a lot of people who lost their homes, who make a lot of money and who have a lot of power. And I'm starting to see a lot of people calling for the resignation of Karen Bass. I'm starting to see a lot of celebrities saying, wake up, Los Angeles. Now, look, I know we shouldn't celebrate these people for just coming to the party, but I'll take them however we can get them. The media, the headlines today, I should have pulled it up before we sat down. Headlines in the LA Times, the New York Times were all about Karen Bass and her failures. Politico talking about Karen Bass and the extended honeymoon period in Los Angeles being over. When the news media leaves you, when the celebrities that had your back blindly start to question you, this is exactly what happened to Joe Biden. That really spelled disaster for the Democrats. It was George Clooney and it was the media turning on him. So look, if there can be a silver lining in all of this, and I'm saying that with all the love and compassion in my heart, because truly, Katie, what I'm seeing here, it's heart-wrenching. But if there can be a change, if there can be a tide change in California because of this, then we can say that there was some good that came out of all of this disaster and all of this sadness. It's the only thing I think that we can hope for right now.
All right. So one last quick story, because it really ties to this in an interesting way. So, in places like California and Virginia, we know that the Democrats outraised the Republicans by a magnitude of whatever, right? A lot. There is a growing story, which is really starting to pick up traction about Act Blue, the Democrat fundraising mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. And there have been a number of investigations that are going on, but here's a new one. And this is really interesting because this brings out some really concrete detail. So there's a man in Connecticut named Dominic Rapini. He has a cybersecurity company. He's a CEO, but he had also run for office. So he was suspicious about what is this Act Blue and what is going on. So he identified some of the donors on Act Blue And he decided to go track them down and to see, were these donations legitimate? And indeed, they were not. So he talked to 8 different people. Get this. One of the people he talked to was an 88-year-old retired Yale professor who supposedly made 7,539 donations to Act Blue for a total for a total of 213,000. And the guy was like, that was not me. And he even signed an affidavit saying that. So I think, it really makes you wonder, are the Democrats even legitimately getting elected? I mean, it's enough to see they're certainly not getting elected because of the success of their policies. But now to have this possibility that the money that they've been able to raise to get themselves elected isn't even legitimately raised, it's pretty stunning.
I know. There's so much to question here. And truly, when you couple that with how so many of us distrust the government and the system, you just wonder what is really going on. What's really going on? Are they really getting all those donations? Are they really getting all that support? I don't know. It goes back to that Karen Bass clip. Are these people really functional besides just spouting out their bullet points? I mean, it's just, I don't know. There's a lot to unpack here. We're going to continue to do that for you as best we can here on the Happy Women podcast. And I want to remind you, get Katie's book. It's called Next Gen Marxism. If you haven't already picked it up, you will not be sorry. You'll be happy that you did. And you want to give her a follow. KatieGorka.org is her website. You can look for Catherine Gorka on Facebook, and you can find her on X at Gorka Katie. You can find me on social media as well, Jennifer Horn Radio on Facebook and Instagram, at Jennifer Horn on X, and on Truth. And please keep those 5-star reviews coming. Share Happy Women with your friends. You can connect with us on all the platforms. You can get all the links at SalemPodcastNetwork.com. Thanks so much for joining us. It's another episode of the Happy Women podcast.